Well, welcome back. In this video, I finished the rebuild on these carbies. Now, what I'm planning to do this time is put a lot more detail into this particular video just to help you guys and girls should you want to try this yourself, or you want to challenge your skills, or you've just maybe got a carbie that you're having troubles with. So look, my videos are all free. I don't have any Patreon. I do want to keep it that way. So all I'd ask is if you do learn something, you feel that these videos are valuable or you'd like to see more of them, then you could help me by making a small donation to my PayPal account. And what that'll do is just help with the equipment I need to keep creating videos of this sort of scale. Maybe before we start, you might want to pause here, grab yourself a coffee or a cup of tea or a beer, and then we'll get into it. So one of the first things I do here is underneath the main jets and the fuel valve, there are little copper washers, as you can see here. And rather than buy new ones, there's really no need. So what I do is heat them up and you quench them in water. And what that does is it anneals them. So they're literally like brand new washers. So you do need to get them red hot and you do need to quench them really quickly. So in the last video, I cleaned out the carbies and you can see them all laid out here. Now the tools you're going to need are a decent set of screwdriver tips to make sure you don't damage anything, some carbie cleaner, silicone paste or grease, some inox or WD-40, and some anti-seize. And I'll show you where we use each of those as we do this rebuild. The carbies need to be really clean. My advice is to pull them right down like I've done here. And you know, if you look at one of the carbies here, you can see how many little ports there are and how important it is that these are clean. And you know, they're not as complicated or as scary as you may think. I think give it a go. Make sure they're clean. If you don't dismantle these, you know, completely, you're going to have areas where there's still going to be junk in there. Now this bowl, one of the problems is that port there. So for the choke, the fuel goes in that little hole at the bottom and it sucks up through the casing, and that's a low point and it tends to get blocked up in XJ650s. When I purchased this bike, the previous owner did say the engine was quite hard to start, and you know what I've found is 4 out of 4 carby bowls were blocked in this area. So I'm just cleaning them out here just to be 100% sure, because this is a common fault. So if you do have an XJ650 or 750 and it's hard to start, it could well be this port. So check that out. The hole in there is very small. So with those bowls cleaned out, what I did then is I got the carby spray with a little nozzle on it, and I progressively just went around all nozzles and holes in the carby just to make sure they're all clear, and then just blow it out with air. The other thing I did is on the slide valve, I got some 1200 wet and dry, and just gave the slide a bit of a rub down, as well as the actual slide valve itself, just to make sure there's no resistance whatsoever. So there's a look in there, come up really good. So these are the parts I've bought. I've got a gasket set for the bowl. I bought some new V-rings, and I chose V-rings instead of O-rings. And I bought a Six Sigma jet kit. So you might be wondering, how am I going to deal with not having the airbox and different mods to the engine and a big bore kit? And this is the key. So I've used the Six Sigma kit on my Mizuki and it worked really well. It comes with a number of jets. There is a mod that you need to do, and I'll show you later with that drill. And there's pretty good instructions too that are specific to your bike. So if you've got mods and you want to get your carbies right, I highly suggest going to the Six Sigma team. So I'll leave a link to their website in the description box. So here's a close look at the carby after it's been cleaned, and I've wet and dried out that bore for the slide, and just to give you an idea how clean you really need it to be. So take your time. Cleaning it is one of the keys, I would say. And also here's the slide valve and the needle cleaned up. Also I use 1200 wet and dry on that. So to get started, to get the throttle shaft, the first thing you need to do is put a bit of silicone grease on that throttle shaft and then apply the first V-ring. Now these V-rings are not cheap, and one thing that is important is you need to put them with the V facing out, as you can see here. Now this is counterintuitive, but the reason for that is carbies are generally under a vacuum. As the vacuum increases, it pulls out the lips of that seal and creates a better seal. So just make sure if you spend all that money that you put it on the right way. Don't forget to put this spring on. Put it through the first hole, and then before it goes completely through, what I do is turn it one turn just to create a bit of load on that spring, hold it into position, and then a little bit of silicone grease again, another V-ring, and you can also see here, obviously that V-ring needs to point outwards as well. And once that's on, put the nylon washer on after a little bit of grease, put the circlip on, and that is pretty much the throttle shaft done. Once it's in, just check that it rotates properly and there's no resistance anywhere, and in this case it's all fine. And the next thing we want to do is install the butterfly valve. So the butterfly valve has slotted holes. Put it in there. I did forget to mention before that for these bolts you need to use Loctite, and I use 243 because you don't want them coming undone. Bit of Loctite, put them in there loosely to start with, rotate that throttle shaft around a couple of times. It will position itself in the right spot, and then you simply tighten up the bolts and you're done, and just check then that it moves freely. The next thing I do is install the air jets. So there's two air jets, a larger one and a smaller. The larger one goes in this position, which is closest to the air inlet, and then the second one goes in the middle. You put this plate on, and there's a bolt that holds that plate down over both jets, and just do that up not too tight. And following that, the next thing I do is put the choke in. Now the choke in these is just a brass seat, so it's brass directly onto the aluminium, so there's no soft seat. Make sure the spring's in. It's a 12mm hex head, so just do that up, check that it moves freely, and then once it's done up, I just put the seal back over there, and that's pretty much the choke done. The next thing I do is install the needle valve. So you can see here as a close-up that the O-ring is before the washer, because obviously it seats on the seat. It's probably common knowledge, but just want to be sure that you don't get those the wrong way around. Screw it in lightly till it bottoms out, and be gentle with it, and then unscrew it. I unscrew it 2.5 turns in preparation for fine tuning once I get the engine started. Then I put the fuel valve seat in and tighten that up. The fuel valve itself has a little spring on it, and that spring sits over the tab of the float, and then it simply drops in, and then you just install the pin for the float. Now on a 650 this pin's quite loose. On some bikes one side may be a bit firmer to hold it in position. Once that's in, put the fuel nozzle in through the top like you can see here, and then you simply screw in the main jet on the other side, and don't forget this one has a copper washer. So do these up again, not too tight, but they need to be firm just to compress that washer appropriately. Now the Six Sigma kit does come with 2 sets of main jets, and the reason for that is depending on how it starts up, I may need to make a fine adjustment and change those jets to a slightly bigger or smaller set that's been provided. So with the main jet in, the next thing I do is put the pilot jet in, which again is part of the kit, and in this case it's a 45, and there is no washer under this one, so just do it up again just firmly, not over tighten it, and that is pretty much the jets done. So now as part of this kit, one of the mods you need to do is drill out these 2 holes on the slide valve, and this will change the air fuel mixture and obviously raise this up probably a bit slower, I would think, because it's going to let more air in. And the other thing is there's some washers that are supplied that need to go under the needle valve just to lift it up to again adjust the air fuel ratio for what's needed for my mods. So again, this Six Sigma kit is specific to my bike, so make sure you get a kit that's specific to yours. Once that's in, I just check that that needle moves freely in there, and that is ready to install into the carbies. So I'll spray a bit of inox inside the carby slide area and on the slide itself before I install it, just to make sure it can move up and down freely. And when you put this in, you obviously need to locate the needle into the nozzle properly, and it may need a little bit of aligning, as you can see here, to get it to fit inside there properly. Once that's in, you just push it down gently, and there's a tab on that diaphragm, and the tab needs to line up with the tab slot in the casing, which you can see here. Once you get this far, simply just put the spring in and then put the top cap on. Now, there are some mods that are potentially suggested from Six Sigma around this spring, and I'm not going to do them at this stage, and that is cutting down the spring a little bit. I'm going to wait until I get this bike running and see how it goes before I go making too many modifications that I can't reverse. So now the top hat screws, they're quite small, don't go crazy, just a bit of anti-seize and do them up firmly, and this carby is pretty much done. So all 4 carbies are exactly the same, so you just follow this process for all 4, and at this point the only thing left to do is install the bowl. So the bowl has this drain bolt. Just put a little bit of silicone grease on that. The little barb in the middle there is when you loosen this, it releases fuel into that barb area, and put a hose on that later to adjust the fuel height properly. So for now, I've just got those fuel floats set so they're parallel to the casing, and I'll set them up later and I'll show you how to do that. Again, a little bit of anti-seize on these bolts, don't over tighten them, and this carby is done. All carbies are exactly the same, so just repeat this process for all 4. And once I had them all done, here's one just to show you. It opens and closes well. All the seals are in, jet kit's in, tops are done. I've got a wrinkle finish on that cap, and the last thing I need to do now is just put the connectors in and put the main support rail. So with all 4 carbies done, I'll just do some final checks. And here they are laid out. All I've got left to do now is to put the brackets back together. So there's 3 carby connectors and they all have O-ring seals on them. So I decided to buy some new Yamaha seals just to make sure I had the right one. So the 3 there, the first one between carby 1 and 2 is the T. The longer of the straight sections goes between carby 2 and 3, and the shorter one between 3 and 4. So I just slip the O-rings on, and once they're on, I'll put a little bit of silicone grease, and then also put some silicone grease inside the port of the actual carbies. And once they're all done, start off with carby 1 and 2 and just gently push them in. And then at the same time, you've got the throttle valve sort of tab or drive that you need to make sure is inserted there as well at the back. And I generally, a bit of pressure to push that spring down, and it just slips in. So the T again goes between carby 1 and 2. The longer section is the next one. Push that in. Carby 2 and 3 join together. And then simply the same thing for the last one. And they're basically all connected. Next thing I do is just install the mounting bracket. So on the bolts for the mounting brackets, I prefer to use anti-seize. I know some people use Loctite, but I've never had a problem with these coming undone. And the problem with Loctite sometimes is they can actually be quite difficult to get off at a later date. So my view is anti-seize is fine with these. So I put this front bracket on first. I don't tighten these up heavy at this point, so just leave them fairly loose, and I'll show you why in a second. Mount the rear, and that's got the adjuster on there. These bolts are 6mm, the front ones are 5mm. Same thing, anti-seize, put them all in, and just have them nipped up. And then what I do, it's quite important that all of these carbies are level to each other, because there is a bit of movement in those holes. So what I find is the easiest thing to do is wedge them in between 2 flat surfaces. So in this case, I just had a bit of RHS laying around, and I got 2 bits, and I used a couple of G clamps and clamped them together, and there was no way they were going to move. They were exactly right. And then I progressively tighten all the bolts up while the clamps are holding them in the right spot. So with the clamps removed, you can just see here how well they're lined up, and yeah, you can't really go wrong. Well, the last thing to do now is just put the choke back together. It's just a shaft, and there's a couple of spaces and a fork that goes over each of the choke valves, so pretty straightforward. There's dimples in the shaft, you can't really go too far wrong. Just put it back the way it come out. Nip them all up, and this is basically done. So these have come up really good. The last thing I need to do is just check the synchronization of each of the butterfly valves to each other. So to do that, what I do is I get two 1/8 drills, and it doesn't really have to be 1/8, but two identical drills. I put it in between the butterfly and the carbie, and I do it in throttle 3 because that's the master, and just let it hold there. I then check carbie 4, 2, and 1, and just adjust them to suit. So you can see up in the close up. You obviously need to do 3 first, then 4, then 2, and then 1. You can't do 1 before 2, otherwise the adjustment will keep changing. So these carbies are all synced now. The jet kit's in, and they're ready to be installed. So I'll show you how to set up the float fuel levels and the fine tuning in a later video. Put any questions you have in the comment section, and in the next video I'll continue on with the engine build. Stay tuned.